environment, more polluted cities, more stressful situation, more oxidative stress and free radical damage, all of those require additional production of membrane-bound organs within our cells. Therefore, fat becomes even more important, especially if you live in modern society and not in some remote paradise island in the middle of the Pacific at the tropical region. Those people don't need as much fat, but when you change your environment, you need more fat. There are so many other factors that can change your fatty acid needs, and we cannot just say that all of us are the same because of that. We cannot say we all need the same type of fat and the same amount of fat, because that would be very dangerous for some of us. To be responsible, we need to understand the nature of fatty acid needs and dietary needs of each individual based on the medical history. Some people digest fat better, some people have a hard time digesting it. It depends on the type of fat that they eat. There are so many factors that we need to take into account, which tells us in a nutshell that not all of us should be eating the same amount of fat, and we should all understand the needs for fat based on our environment and our genetics and our medical history. Are we all clear so far?
Yes, I love it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, so let's understand some of the fat terms, and I'll try and make the biochemistry as painless as possible. So bear with me just a little bit, and we'll be going through it very quickly. I hope that you can get something out of it. We understood already that lipids are just a general term, a term that covers all the different insoluble or water-insoluble organic substances. And when I say organic, I refer to any compound containing carbons. So lipids include within them the whole class of fats. And fats are basically combination of fatty acids which are solid, usually in room temperature, whereas oil is fatty acids that are liquid in room temperature. And those fatty acids will be liquid or solid depending on what is inside them. Are they saturated? Are they unsaturated? Are they monounsaturated? That will determine whether or not it will be solid in room temperature or liquid in room temperature. The saturated fats usually are solid in room temperature because they're tightly packed together. Why is that? They're tightly packed together because they're straight, long chains of carbons. Long chains can stack up one on top of the other very tightly, and that is why they remain solid. They have stronger forces pulling them together towards each other. So when they are saturated, they have no places where hydrogens can be inserted because they are already full. They're already saturated and full with all the hydrogens that they can contain. Therefore, they are saturated with all the hydrogens. That is why they're called saturated fats. And because they are totally full with hydrogens, they are straight. Unsaturated fats have areas where hydrogen can still be inserted. If hydrogen can be inserted, it means that there are electrons available to bind hydrogen. And whenever we have those electrons available to bind hydrogen, we call that a double bond. Normally, in saturated fatty acids, we have single bond. Only 2 electrons are shared between each pair of carbons that are next to each other. But in unsaturated fat, we have 4 electrons, not just 2. The extra pair of electrons is further away from the center, and it is therefore more susceptible to being kicked out of orbit. And that is why unsaturated fats are less stable. It is also why they are more crooked in their shape, and they are not tightly stacked together, so they stay liquid in room temperature. And that is why they are used mostly as oils, not as shortenings. So those are unsaturated fatty acids, and there are two types of unsaturated fatty acids. One is the monounsaturated. It's called mono because it has only one double bond. An example of monounsaturated fatty acid is avocado oil and component of canola oil and component of sesame oil, but mostly olive oil is considered the monounsaturated fatty acid. Only one double bond. So it's slightly less perishable than polyunsaturated fatty acid, because polyunsaturated has more than one double bond. They could have two double bonds or three double bonds, which have more electrons that can be kicked out of orbit. Therefore, they are more perishable. Are we all clear so far?
Yes, thank you.
I hope it was not too much. We're almost done with this chemistry lesson. The last thing we need to understand right now in chemistry is the concept of hydrogenation. When we take polyunsaturated fatty acid, which is obviously containing more than one double bond and is more perishable as a result, and we subject it to a chemical process that hydrogenates or add hydrogens to part of the bonds of the polyunsaturated fatty acids. That means that it's partially hydrogenated. And some of those double bonds are going to be converted into trans bonds, meaning the hydrogen is going to artificially be inserted in two different sides of the bond instead of on the same side. This is what creates trans fats. So hydrogenation is a process that leads to plastic fats or trans fats, and those fats cannot be broken down by the enzymes of our body, because our enzymes can only approach the fatty acid from one side, not from both sides at the same time. And that means that those trans fatty acids will stay much, much longer in our body and create problems to our liver and create a problem with lipid metabolism and incorporate into cell membranes and affect membrane function, and can increase the risk of some cancers as a result. So we don't want to eat too much of this trans fatty acid content that is so frequently found in processed foods, because many corporations want to turn the fat, the oil, into solid and make it a little more stable so people can use it instead of butter. And that is how they form margarine, and they use this type of hydrogenation in shortening, for baking, and for other processing and preparation of foods containing commercially available fats. A lot of people thought for a few generations that they're getting good vegetable oils thanks to the hydrogenation process, when they really were being duped. They were getting a substance that is foreign to the body. And that made the hydrogenated polyunsaturated oils even worse than the saturated animal fats. And everybody has been aware that saturated animal fat is the bad fat, because that has been associated with numerous types of cancers and obesity and diabetes. But as we said earlier, it was not just the fat that made all those things happen. And if you listen to the seminar about protein, now you know that the main culprit in most of those chronic degenerative diseases was not the total amount of fat, but the protein. Nevertheless, saturated animal fat usually come with a lot of animal protein, and that's a bad thing by itself. Saturated animal fats also contain cholesterol, which some people think is a huge issue. Other people will disagree. Cholesterol is not that huge of an issue by itself, but the most important thing is what else is contained in those saturated fatty acids that come from animals.